Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our colleagues here in the room and our participants online. Marco tells me we have quite a big number of participants online. My name is Stephanie Borch-Psaila. I am the Interim Director of the DiploFoundation, and it is my pleasure to welcome you for today's webinar on the results of the first reporting exercise under the WaterLaw Convention of 1992. This is actually the second webinar we're organizing in the space of a few weeks. The first webinar, the first event that we had was a few weeks ago in October on water and armed conflicts. If you missed the webinar, if you missed this event, the recording is on DiploFoundation's YouTube channel. Today, the discussion is on a related topic which I just mentioned. It is the Water Convention of 1992. And I'm abbreviating it, but in reality, the full name of the convention is the International Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses and International Lakes. And it is a convention of the UN Economic Commission for Europe. It is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists who are here with us today. Thank you for joining us. To my right is Dr. Mara Tiniino, coordinator of the Platform for International Water Law and a reader at the University of Geneva. Mara will guide us through the convention and will give us a little bit of context for this reporting exercise. And we also have Ms. Chantal Demilkamp, Environmental Affairs Officer at the Water Convention Secretariat at the same commission. And Chantal will tell us more about the results of the first reporting exercise and the link to SDG, Sustainable Development Goal Indicator 6.5.2. We know that the SDG Goal 6 relates to clean water and sanitation. So thank you, Chantal and Mara, for joining us. I'll also add, before I give the floor to our panelists, that today's webinar and even the webinar of last month is being organized as part of the course on international water law and the law of transboundary aquifers, which is delivered by the University of Geneva. In fact, I can say that the participants who are with us online are students of this course. Well, I would say many of them. Just one final comment before I give the floor to our panelists. For our online participants, if it is the first time you are joining us, you feel free to ask any questions or post any comments in the space, in the online platform, in the space dedicated at the bottom for, you have a text field there, so you can post your questions and comments, and my colleague Marco will be the bridge between the online participants and our panelists here in the room. For our participants here in Geneva, which is where we're sort of broadcasting this webinar from, please take a note of your questions and the comments. After each, if you agree, Mara and Chantal, after each presentation, we'll stop to take questions and comments, a little discussion there before moving on to the next intervention. All right, perfect. So once again, welcome to this webinar, to this event, and I'll give immediately the floor to Mara. Thank you. You have the mic there.
Yes.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the nice introduction, and it is a pleasure to be this year for the second time for a webinar related to the online course. Today I will give an overview of the UNECE Water Convention, and then Chantal, as Stephanie just said, will share the results of the UNECE Water Convention meeting of the parties in Astana. Next slide, please. So I will start with giving some features of the Water Convention, and then I will focus on some of the goals, principles, and obligations of this instrument. Next slide, please. So here you can see the publication on the global opening of the Water Convention. I will tell you some more words in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So I think that it is important to place the UNECE Water Convention in the historical context of the pan-European region and also of the world in general. So in the at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, we have the dissolution of the USSR, and so there was the willingness to create a space of collaboration and dialogue between Eastern and Western Europe. Just to give you a background, also it is related to the UN Economic Commission for Europe. The UN Economic Commission for Europe, it is one of the regional economic organizations of the United Nations. So you have a regional economic organization in South America, Africa, Eastern and Western Asia, and the regional economic organization, so UNECE for Europe, it is a pan-European organization, so it is not to be mixed with the European Union. And among the states we have Russia, but also United States, Canada, and Israel, and of course the Central Asian countries. So this economic commission really became the center, we can say, in the 80s and in the 90s to start this cooperation between the Eastern and Western countries. And already during the 80s were adopted some documents on, for example, air pollution or waters, that show the importance of the environment for the Economic Commission for Europe. And on water, so in 1992 was adopted the Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Water Courses and International Lakes, so the Water Convention, that it entered into force in 1996. So we can see the difference between this convention and the UN Water Courses Convention, that we know the long process of negotiation. And this result was possible for the limited number of countries, and also for the fact that the pan-European region shared this environmental concern. In fact, if we look at the convention, as we will see in a few slides, it focuses on the prevention of pollution. And but now, so in the beginning of the 2000 and 2003 exactly, the meeting of the parties adopted an amendment to open the convention to all UN member states. And I think it is also due to the fact that environmental concerns are today shared by all countries. And also the cooperation that is at the center of the convention, it also became a value of all the countries. So in next slide, please. So in 2003, the meeting of the parties adopted the amendment that entered into force in 2013, and in 2016, so the convention was open to the accession from all UN member states. And this year we have the first two countries outside the pan-European region that acceded to the convention, so Chad and Senegal. And so today we have 43 states that are parties of the convention. And something is important from the legal point of view, it is that this convention, the Water Convention, is a framework agreement. So a global framework agreement that it is a reference, we can say, to conclude agreements on at the regional or on specific water courses. So there is this complementarity, we can say, between different levels, so the universal level, the regional levels, and the basin level. And the UNECE Water Convention is complemented by 4 annexes, so on best environmental practices, on developing common water quality objectives, and an annex on arbitration. Then we have also 2 protocols that I will say a few words in the next slide. Next slide, please. So if we look at the scope of application of the Convention, it is important to stress the fact that the Convention covers all surface and groundwater resources, and this is something different from the UN Watercourses Convention, so the Convention on the Law of the Non-Navigational Uses of International Watercourses, that only covers groundwaters that are related to surface water. Next slide, please. So as I said, the transboundary waters cover surface and groundwater, but also an important element, it is the fact that there is the concept of a basin that it is included in the UNECE Water Convention. So it includes not only the waters of international water courses, but also the land areas. So there is a large scope of this convention, and also it includes the environmental aspect like air, flora, and fauna. And we will see this aspect also in the concept of transboundary impacts. Next slide. So as I said, we have 2 protocols that complement the Convention, the Protocol on Water and Health, so that promotes the right to water and sanitation, and we have now 26 parties, and a protocol on civil liability that was adopted in 2003, and it is not yet into force. Next slide. So we can go the next slide, please. So this, in the obligations for the parties of the UNECE Water Convention, we can divide the obligation that are applicable to all parties of the convention, and the obligation that are only applicable to riparian parties. So if we look to at the obligations for all contracting parties, here you can see this concept of transboundary impact that is very large, and also include, for example, the impact to landscape or historical monuments or health. So really a wide scope of application. Next slide. Then the Convention include the most important principles of international environmental law. We should remind that the Convention was just adopted after the Rio conference. So in the Rio Declaration, we have these principles that have been included in the Convention: the precautionary principle, the polluter pays principle, and the principle of sustainable development. I could say a little bit more in the discussion. Next slide, please. And then we have the obligation to riparian parties, and I think that there the Convention show the strength and the importance of these instruments. So the Article 9 contains the obligation for the parties to conclude multilateral or bilateral agreements on shared water resources, or to adapt existing agreements to the principle of the UNECE Water Convention. Next slide. And this provision, so these agreements on shared water basin have also to include the establishment of joint institutional bodies, and here you can see some of the tasks and functions of these bodies. Next slide, please. So the institutional frameworks This is an important element of the convention compared to the, especially to the UN Watercourses Convention. We have a meeting of the parties, so just what Chantal will say later, that meets every 3 years. The meeting of the parties can adopt amendments, as we saw regarding the amendments in 2013, and also the meeting of the parties can put into place subsidiary bodies, like, for example, the Working Group on Integrated Water Resource Management, or also the Implementation Committee that today we don't have the time to focus on this aspect, but you will have some videos in the online course. Next slide. So to summarize the main points, the UNECE Water Convention, it is a pillar of the global governance on water and the transboundary water cooperation. And so, as I said, it is a framework agreement. It is an agreement that has to be complemented with other agreements at the regional or at the bilateral level, for example, on specific basins. And also it is important, just to also make the link with the next presentation, the meeting of the parties allow not to adapt the convention to the evolution of the interest of the international community. So, for example, it is exactly what we will see with the meeting of the parties in Astana, that it allows to the UNECE Water Convention to evolve, so to be a living instrument. Many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara, for that introduction to the Water Convention. And I think I said WaterLaw Convention earlier. I meant Water Convention. All right, so we'll open the floor to a few comments and questions here from our colleagues in the room and our colleagues online. But before we do, I do have a question myself, and this is for the benefit of those who are not so much into the subject but are still following online. And perhaps, Mara, you can tell us a little bit in brief what the difference between all contracting parties and riparian parties are. So basically what the definition of riparian parties is.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Yes, the riparian parties are the parties that are sharing an international water courses, and to all countries, so all the member states of the convention. So some obligations are specific to the countries that share a water course or a lake or a groundwater resource.
Perfect. That is, I hope, clear to our participants. So here I turn the microphone to you. Any questions or comments? And we have a question from our colleague. Can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Maria. I'm from the University of Geneva. I'm a student there, and I have two questions. One is why the second protocol is not yet into force, and because I remind that it isn't. And the second one is regarding the Sustainable Development Principle applied at the convention. As you said, it is influenced by the Rio Convention. So if this principle is a static one, or it can evolve, or it has evolved after the convention, like is a principle that can change, or is a static one, like the scope of the principle one?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Are you referring to a specific principle?
Yeah, the one of sustainable development.
All right, okay, perfect. Thank you. So, Mara, over
Yes,
to you
yes.
to respond. I'm sorry
Yeah.
to cross the room like this.
Thank you.
You can respond, and then we'll take questions.
So the protocol on civil liability, it is not yet in force. So there is only one contracting party, and this instrument was adopted after an accident that took place in an affluent of the Danube, and so the idea of the protocol, it is that there is a prompt compensation in the case of an industrial accident in a transboundary river. In fact, this protocol, it is common to the UNECE Water Convention and the UNECE Convention on Transboundary pollution on transboundary water courses. And so the reasons why it is not yet into force, I think that the issue of compensation can be difficult to accept to many countries. So there is, I think, with the time, no countries will be able to accept this protocol and the obligations of this protocol. But also, I would like to say that at the international level, we can have also other mechanisms, like, for example, national courts or regional courts of human rights, where, for example, the individuals, the communities can bring claims against this damage that take into place in transboundary rivers. And we have a case in Switzerland, the Sandoz case on the Rhine River, so between France and Switzerland, where there are several domestic cases related to this case of pollution. And then the second question.
I'll interrupt you just a little bit, Mara. It's related to the same question. So once the protocol on civil liability comes into force, which court then would have jurisdiction?
It will be where the accident takes place and where the individuals are located that suffer the damage.
So that is what the protocol will change then. All right, interesting. And related to the second question, which our colleague asks, perhaps you can very quickly go through the principles. I think the question was related to the sustainable development principles.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps a brief description of what each principle, the precautionary and polluter-pays principle.
So the principle of precaution, it is not to take a measure. That a state should take a measure also in the case of uncertainty, also in the case the science is not certain, and this is the case, for example, of climate change, that at the beginning there was a lot was believed to be on the basis of the precautionary principle, but today maybe we can say that we are more on the prevention side, so that we know that already there are some impacts, and there is not yet anymore the uncertainty of science. And then the second principle, so the polluter pays principle, it is related to a private operator, for example, that cause damage, and this principle say that the polluter has to pay the cost of pollution. And the third principle, so that you refer to sustainable development, we know that the sustainable development is based on 3 pillars, so economic, environmental, and social. I think that there is an evolution, and for example, with the sustainable development goals, not this principle really expand, it takes a more important role.
Thank you, Mara, for going into the 3 principles, and I hope the question on sustainable development was answered. Do we have any more questions or comments from the room? No, very good. So, Marco, I turn the floor to you. We have questions, and you need the microphone.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have some first reactions from about the first presentation. We have a first question from Isagul, and I apologize for any mispronunciation. She's asking, what are the status of Iraq and Syria with acceding the UNECE Water Convention? Are they close to become members? Are there still issues to enter? And thank you to Zaid, who clarified a bit the answer for us as per Iraq. He said, we attended the meeting in Astana, Kazakhstan, with a high-level delegation. We are now finalizing the approval to join the UNECE. So that could be also already answered. And we have another reaction from Atef. He's asking, do you think we need to revise Helsinki rules on the uses of the waters of international rivers and the Hague the Declaration on water security based on present and expected water needs and also on water conflicts?
Thank you, Marco, for summarizing the questions, and thank you for our online participants for intervening there. Mara, perhaps you can take the first one. I think was sort of answered, but please.
Yes, I think that Chantal could say more after the presentation. But yes, as the second participant said, Iraq, it is really next to the accession. And regarding the third question, I think that there is a confusion with other instrument, that it is the Helsinki rules of 1966. So it has been there is already a new instrument after the Helsinki rules that are the Berlin rules of the International Law Association. So the Helsinki rule was adopted by the International Law Association. So this is a soft law instrument that's adopted by a professional group of lawyers. And here now we are discussing the UNECE Water Convention, that it is a binding instrument.
Thank you, Mara, for that. I hope it answers the question from Aleph, if I'm not mistaken. Marco, are there any other questions or comments from online? All right, very good. So now I think we turn to Chantal and the reporting exercise, the results. Chantal, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all the participants online, and also the one in the rooms, and maybe good morning, good evening, I don't know, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure now to complement on what Mara has introduced. My presentation will focus more on the progress on transboundary water cooperation based on what was discussed at the last session of the meeting of the parties of the Water Convention in Astana a few weeks ago, and specifically the result of the first reporting exercise under the convention. But I will also give some information on the outcomes of the reporting on SDG Indicator 652 on transboundary water cooperation. Next, please. So the 8th session of the meeting of the parties was held in Astana from 10 to 12 of October. And the objective was to review progress of transboundary water cooperation. Mostly reviewing the progress on the different activities implemented under the convention over the past 3 years. Also highlighting the remaining challenges related to transboundary water cooperation. And it showed actually that the global momentum is building to support transboundary water cooperation worldwide. So there were really positive outcomes. Next, please. So it was actually the first session of the meeting of the parties, which was organized in Asia, and it was a truly global event. And this is related to the recent global opening of the convention. As Mara mentioned, since 2016, all UN member states can now accede, and there is a growing interest from many countries from different continents to accede to the convention. So there were 90 countries represented, and from them 50 countries from different regions announced their interest to ratify the convention. And I'm happy to have also the Iraqi colleagues online, and they are among those parties which have actually already done a lot of work towards preparing for accession. This meeting of the parties, I will not enter into the details. You will see at the end of my presentation there is a link to find all the information which is available online. But to be brief, there was an adoption of decisions and documents, and specifically a strategy for the implementation of the convention at the global level was adopted and will guide actually the work under the Water Convention from now on in the past 3 years and beyond. Other interesting projects are that several publications were launched in Astana. They are the output of the work that was implemented during the past 3 years and sometimes even before, and the collective effort of development in cooperation with representatives of the parties, of partners from international governmental organizations and non-governmental organizations. And they are here, so there is the Words into Action implementation guide on addressing water-related disasters and transboundary cooperation, which was developed together with the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. An updated methodology on assessing the water-food energy ecosystem nexus. So this is based on the experience under the Water Convention on assessing the intersectoral uses and collaborations for the different uses of water resources in transboundary basins, and also lessons learned from pilot projects on assessing the benefits of transboundary water cooperation. Next, please. Another important outcome of the meeting of the parties was the adoption of an ambitious program of work, which will guide the different activities to be implemented under the convention from next year until 2021. So I will not enter into the details. This document is also available online. But just to say that the program of work is a kind of mandate that we receive from member states, from parties, on what we will do under the convention. And it's actually a common effort that was done before the MOP to develop it, and it's guided by the needs of the parties regarding transboundary cooperation. So countries are actually expressing what are the challenges that they face, and according to this, decide on activities to be implemented together, exchange of experiences, guidance to develop, to help them strengthen transboundary water cooperation. So this program of work it has a comprehensive approach. It actually touches a bit on the several aspects of transboundary water cooperation. So first, of course, there will be a lot of activities related to further promoting the convention worldwide, but also helping countries to implement it. As accession is not the objective, it's actually the implementation which matters. Support to monitoring, assessing, and information sharing in transboundary basins. Work on integrated water resources management in transboundary basins. Adaptation to climate change. Also, a new work area will be on facilitating the financing of transboundary water cooperation, which is a challenge faced by most of the countries, actually, and the work on the reporting, both on Sustainable Development Goal Indicator 652 and the reporting under the convention, which I will further present. Next, please. So I will now enter into more details of the results of the first reporting exercise under the Water Convention. Next, please. So this report was launched just now at the MOP. But to give you some background on the reporting, as Mara introduced the convention, you saw that there was actually no provision related to the reporting. So reporting on implementation of the convention was not initially foreseen in the obligations of the convention. And there was a decision introduced in 2015 to introduce this reporting. So this is, an illustration showing that actually the convention can evolve according to the needs and the requests by parties. The idea of introducing this reporting mechanism is that in order to better support countries on better implementing the convention, we need to understand first where they stand and also what are the challenges they face. So that was the rationale beyond introducing this reporting mechanism. So there was this is actually the result of the first kind of pilot reporting cycle. Invitation was sent to the different parties of the Water Convention to report in January 2017. And the 38 out of the 40 parties reported. So there were 40 parties at the time when we sent the invitation, there are now 43. Next, please. I will now go through the key findings. So this was based on the analysis of these 38 reports that we received by the countries. So what it shows, first at the national level, because as Mara said, there are actually several provisions in the Water Convention which are related to national legislation, national policy, as it's understood that you cannot actually cooperate with your neighboring country if you don't have a strong system and strong regulatory framework at the national level. So the Water Convention in its text, in its Article 2 and 3, request all the parties to put in place all appropriate measures to ensure the prevention, control, and reduction of transboundary impacts. And these measures can be of legal, administrative, economic, financial, or technical nature. Now, if we look at the result of the reporting, it shows that most countries, most parties have adopted laws and policies related to transboundary impact, that system for licensing, controlling, and monitoring pollutions are in place, and that environmental impact assessment laws and policies are also existing at the national level. So it's actually quite interesting to see that national legislation is quite strong in the region, and it helps a lot for transboundary water management. Next, please. So as Mara also introduced, the Water Convention requires parties to enter into agreement and to establish joint bodies. So there were several questions in the reporting template asking for information on this. And what the reports show is that almost all basins have arrangements in force and joint bodies in place in the Pan-European region. Still, there are at least 15 basins which lack arrangements that cover the entire basin. So some arrangements or agreements actually have a specific either geographical focus or sectoral focus. So there is still an opportunity to maybe to revise or to broaden the agreements to have a more sustainable development, maybe vision. At least 29 basins do not have arrangements covering transboundary aquifers. So most agreements focus on surface water, and it's, as everywhere, the problem also to frame cooperation over transboundary aquifers. And it remains a challenge in the region. Arrangements also reflect that many of the key topics of the cooperation within the convention are taken into account when developing the basin agreements or the bilateral agreements. Elaboration of water quality objectives are reflected. Also the principle, mutual assistance is also considered in the agreements. Joint pollution inventories are also considered in the agreements. But climate change adaptation is less covered, and this can be historical also because some of the agreements have been established before climate change impact was actually scientifically recognized. Many tasks and activities set out in the article of the convention are also reflected in the joint bodies. So on their mandate, they often cover the maintenance of the pollution inventory, the setting of emission limits, climate change adaptation, basin wide or joint public participation and consultation are still a challenge. Next, please. So now on the implementation again, some other key findings. So the reporting show that there is widespread practice of adopting joint or coordinated water management plans. Measures to protect ecosystems of transboundary waters are commonly incorporated, both at national and at basin level. Data and information is exchanged in almost all transboundary water reports. And this is often actually how cooperation starts, through data and information exchange. Still, 7 basins has to put it in place, but we can also see that there are shared databases and platforms that could be more widely used to facilitate this exchange of data and information. There are also concerted efforts to adopt a joint monitoring and assessment program, but in at least 32 basins, such programs are not in place. So it's progressing, but there is still a lot that can be done. Joint water quality standards are also in place in the majority of the basins, but here again, at least 15 basins reported that this doesn't exist in their basins. And provisions related to accidental pollution, mutual assistance for extreme events, and public participation appear not to be widely implemented. So you can see this in the small graph below, that all the provisions related to public participation, consultation on applied measures, and public involvement are still not fully implemented in most of the under most of the joint bodies. Next one. So what are the lessons learned and the next steps for this reporting and the Water Convention? So all the countries which participated into reporting exercise acknowledge that reporting is an effective means by which to measure implementation of the convention, and it was actually also really useful at the national level to bring around the same table several stakeholders to actually fill the reporting template, bringing people from the water sector, from the energy sector, from foreign affairs to actually discuss the topic and to understand within the country itself where they stand. But what it shows also is that there is also still a possibility to improve the reporting through harmonizing the reporting, through, for example, using the basin commission, so that the different countries sharing the same water body answer in a harmonized way. The reporting template itself can be improved through clear questions and guidance, and it's actually being improved currently. And there are also some gaps and challenges to consider in the future reporting exercise regarding the reporting, the geographical scope of arrangements and joint bodies, and the functional scope and implementation. But as another conclusion, while gaps and challenges remain, the pilot reporting exercise shows a high level of implementation of the Water Convention in the pan-European region. And this is also related to the history of the Convention. It's more than 20 years of implementation in the pan-European region, and it shows that actually it has progressed. Transboundary water cooperation has really progressed a lot in the region. Next, please. So now what I would like to show is that actually this was the reporting under the Water Convention, so for parties to the Convention. But at the same time, so parties to the Convention were invited to report progress on SDG Indicator 652, Transboundary water cooperation. But this invitation to report on SDG Indicator 652 was also sent to all countries in the world sharing transboundary water resources. And here I will not go into the detail, but I would like to show you in the next slide, this map, which actually shows the outcomes of this first reporting on SDG 652. So this SDG 652 measures the proportion of transboundary basin area with an operational arrangement for water cooperation. What you can show on the map is that 107 countries sent a report on SDG 652, And this was as of March 2018, out of the 153 countries sharing transboundary water. So it's actually an extremely high answer rate. And this is also the first time that countries themselves reported on such information. 70% of the countries sharing transboundary waters responded. Out of this report, it was possible to calculate the value of the indicator for 60% of the responses. And now if we look at the pan-European region, mostly 95% of the parties to the Water Convention submitted a report. If we look at the average percentage of the proportion of transboundary basin area covered with an operational arrangement for water comprehension, it amounts to 59%. This percentage was calculated on the basis of 62 country reports. And another key finding is that only 7 countries in the world reported that all the transboundary waters, so surface water and groundwater, are actually covered by operational arrangement. Next, please. And here again, I will not enter into the details to still have some time for discussion, but this graph shows that there are also high disparities between the different regions regarding progress in transboundary water cooperation. So as the presentation will be online, I will let you see also this later. And you will also find links in the next slides on the where to access information that I just presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. Thank you for this really good overview on the results of the first reporting exercise. It's good to see the results of the country's responses on the SDG 652. That's excellent. Also good to know, this is something that I found very interesting, the lessons learned, to see that even within the same countries, at least the reporting exercise managed to bring together the actors to talk about the issue. So that is, it's very good. We'll turn to our participants here in the room and also online for questions and comments. And then I have a question of my own, but towards the end. So any questions from the room or comments? Yes. So I'll cross our student from the University of Geneva.
Thank you. You say that there are some provisions that are not fully implemented. So which will be a strategy that is already foreseen for these kind of provisions to really be fulfilled? Or, for example, you talk about the one of accidental pollution. So which will be like an alternative strategy to really have an implementation?
Thank you. Would you like to take the question now, or shall we gather all the questions from our online participants also?
Maybe we gather a few.
Perfect. So Mark, summarize.
We have quite a few reactions, actually. One of them comes from the YouTube live stream. It's from Falika. She's asking, is it possible to have such a convention that will not require an amendment in the future? And will there be any advantages or disadvantages? And then we have a clarification from Luma, as per Iraq has access to the UNECE Water Convention. It has been said that Iraq chose 3 focal points in the Water Convention and sent it to the Foreign Affairs Ministry to inform the Secretary of the Convention. So this is, I think, it's good news. We have another question from Suha. It's asking, where do developing countries stand with regard to international water conventions in general and UNECE Convention in particular? Another follow-up question from Isagul. She's asking the relation between the UNECE Convention and the Water Framework Directive, particularly as how it relates to the river basin management in international river basins. Are there any coordination mechanisms between the two? And another one from Atef, asking, how are weak countries adapting to climate change in transboundary basins? And the last reaction from Zaid is asking, does the UNECE Convention have any mechanism to review and the related national legislations of the parties in terms of transboundary water, and does it provide any assistance to this regard? Thank you.
Thank you, Marco, for summarizing, and thank you to all those reactions. Very interesting questions. Perhaps they can be shared. I think some questions Chantal can take, some questions Mara can take. Chantal, I guess we can start with you to reply to the questions from the room and online.
So to answer the first question, which is what can you do basically when the convention is not fully implemented? I would like to clarify that the idea of the convention is not, is to encourage cooperation, to give a framework, to help countries to progress. But it's understood that it's impossible to, from one day to another day, to implement all the provisions of the convention. It's actually quite demanding. So there is a due diligence obligation, which means like a step-by-step improvement of both the national legislation and the transboundary cooperation, tending towards implementing all the obligations of the convention. And if we have this program of work and all these activities under the convention, it's actually to help countries to further strengthen cooperation and to implement more and more provisions of the convention. The idea is not to penalize or to sue countries for not implementing them all, but more to help through exchange of experience, creating knowledge, and so on. And then if a country has a specific problem, they can also ask the Secretariat for some support, and there is also an implementation committee which has been created, which can also give some, for example, legal advice on specific topics. Then I think I will also take maybe the relation between the UNECE, the Water Convention and the Water Framework Directive. So the Water Framework Directive was developed after the convention entered into force. And actually the Water Framework Directive considers the provisions of international water law and specifically of the Water Convention. And it was developed also on that basis. The obligations are stricter in the Water Framework Directive. But also for you to know that the European Union is a party to the convention also. And if there is a coordination mechanism, actually most of the EU member states, if not all, are parties to the convention, and there is no contradiction between the obligations of the convention and the obligations under the Water Framework Directive. And also there is a lot of support from the EU, for example, for the new member states which join the EU or for the neighboring countries to align with the Water Framework Directive, and through this also to align with the obligations of the Water Convention. And I will answer also the question on climate change in Transboundary Basin. So the Convention has been pioneer on working on this issue, because the work on climate change adaptation in Transboundary Basin has started under the Convention in 2007, when it was just initial discussion on this topic, and has developed a lot of guidance on how to address the different aspects of the impact of climate change in a transboundary context. So there is now a global network of transboundary basins working on adaptation to climate change, and 2 guidance documents which have been developed under the Water Convention to support countries. And it's an extremely active work area under the Convention, with a global workshop organized every year.
For clarifying, for answering to the comments, and for clarifying perhaps the aim of the convention, that it is more of a cooperation effort rather than to penalize those countries who do not manage to fulfill all the obligations. So that is very important. Mara, would you like to add anything to the questions? There was a question, a very interesting one, regarding developing countries. Where do developing countries stand in general? And that was more or less also my question, because sometimes you see a disparity between developed and developing countries. So I was also wondering whether that is the case on the Water Convention.
I think Now with the accession of Senegal and Chad, there will be not the Secretariat, I think will have also this additional task to help these countries to implement the convention at the national level. But already I think that the Secretariat has an experience in working with countries, for example, from Central Asia or Eastern Europe. So I think that there is already an experience with countries that are less developed than European Union countries.
Thank you, Mara, for that. Are there any questions or comments from the room, or perhaps even online? All right, very good. So I do have one final question for Chantal. Chantal, from the experience of the Secretariat, what is perhaps I'm sorry. I was just asking whether there were any comments, and Marco says no. There is maybe an additional question for Chantal. So, from the experience of the Secretariat, what would be perhaps the most, let's say, challenging issue for implementing the convention? Is there? I'm sure there are quite a few, as we've seen. Is there any issue that particularly stands out?
The answer will not be a real answer. I would say it depends. Actually, each basin is different, and this is actually why. I mean, we say it's a framework agreement, so it's kind of general obligations to comply with, but then the implementation has to be tailored to the needs, to the situation, to the economic development, to the political situation, to the environmental setting of the basin. Of course, one of the questions which is raised a lot now is like, how do we adapt to climate change? So many of the basins, and this is worldwide, are facing extreme weather events, either floods or droughts, and sometimes droughts where you thought that actually floods were the problems, and on the other way, so big floods in Tunisia and droughts in Central Europe. So this is a lot of new elements that the countries and also the basin organizations are not trying to take into consideration in their decision-making processes. And the value of the convention is like to serve as a platform for the sharing of experiences, because we actually now see that we need the knowledge of the other regions. So for example, in Europe, there is a lot that we are learning from the Middle East, from Africa, because they have been facing these issues of drought for years and years, and they have strategies to adapt. And on the other way, Europe has a big knowledge on how to manage transboundary floods, and this is now coming to some, to North Africa. So this is how also the convention can help.
So there is no one-size-fits-all, really. But it is good also to learn that knowledge sharing is important, and the sharing of data is also important. And to tie it into the one of the previous comments that you made during the presentation, it is also like the basis for cooperation where there is none at the moment. All right, so that is excellent. Are there any comments or questions from the online participants? We have one, so Mark, over to you again.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have a last question asking what were the bottlenecks for non-parties to the conventions while they are completing the report template, and what will be the future steps to overcome those issues on harmonizing SDG 6.5.2 indicator for all UN countries?
Quite a bundled question, and I think this is Chantal
for
you.
Thanks for the question. It's actually something I forgot to mention, so thanks for the question. So bottlenecks for the reporting, now I think we concentrate on reporting on SDG indicator 6.5.2. The calculation of the indicator actually requires that the country have data on the transboundary basins. And often the problem is how to report on cooperation over groundwater, because for many of the countries, they sometimes don't even know exactly what is this the resource of the groundwater. So what is the superficie of the groundwater body? So it's you cannot calculate the indicator with this lack of data. So there is still a lot here. This is one of the main bottleneck. But if we turn it also, the first reporting cycle actually helped a lot of countries to be aware of this lack of data. So it was extremely good also for bringing again, I mean, the different people together around the table and to understand what is the lack of data and to work on it. And the next reporting cycle will be in 3 years from now. So the invitations to report will be sent end of 2019 with a deadline for reporting mid-2020.
With data is quite cross-cutting across the SDGs in general, not just SDG 6. Thank you also for the note on the procedure reporting in 3 years' time. All right. Any final comments from you, Mara or Chantal? No, from our online participants here in the room and online, I'm told there are none. All right, so it is my turn then to thank you both for being here with us today, to thank our participants in the room here in Geneva and online also for joining us today. The recording, I think, will be on our YouTube channel, so if you want to revisit what has been said, you're more than welcome to do so and to also share it with those whom may be interested in the topic. So thank you once again, and thank you for joining us, and goodbye.
Thank you.